Indiana Jones is led by a guide through the thick forest on his search for the elusive Sasquatch. The guide has just found footprints, but this will not be enough to satisfy the museum. However, they will soon discover something far more significant than footprints. Welcome to the Indiana Jones Lorecast, where we delve into the lore and the history of the Indiana Jones franchise. Hello everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Kel, or Sir Bandit, and today I have a couple of special guests joining me. I'd like to welcome to the show Brandon, or Ben of Temeria, and Austin, or Teecup, the hosts of the Holocron Histories podcast, as well as some other great shows on the Robots Radio Network. So, how you doing, guys?
I'm doing great.
Yeah, me too.
No, good. I'm really glad to have you guys on. So, today we are going to be doing something quite special. We're going to be covering a strange and a very little-known piece of Indiana Jones media, and this is a comic titled Into the Great Unknown, which is a crossover comic between Indiana Jones and Star Wars, hence the guests for this episode. We will also be going through some other small crossovers and kind of hidden little Easter eggs that exist between the two franchises, but first we're going to be going over the comic and sort of just discussing its story, which shouldn't take all too long as the comic is only 10 pages long. The comic itself was published by Dark Horse, and it's classified under Star Wars Legends. So, do you guys want to explain what Legends and sort of canon means? Legends versus canon when it comes to Star Wars media.
Yeah, so Legends is material that is not in the timeline of what George Lucas considers as his canon, everything that is true to the story.
Yeah,
So in an interview back, I believe in 2012, before the Disney got the rights for Star Wars, George Lucas confirmed his canon it consists of the films and the Clone Wars. That was it. Um,
that's
Everything that
surprising.
was, yeah, I know. I did not know that until I was doing more
I would
research
have
on
thought
it
that some of the
recently.
other shows would have also been considered canon as well, because there are quite a few Star Wars series. And I'm not even referring to the new Disney ones. I'm saying there were quite a few before that, I believe.
Yes. Well, it was not a whole lot of shows. I mean, there was the Clone Wars, which was the major one, and then they had the two. Austin, you can remind me what year this was, the original Clone Wars. I can't
It
remember
was
the
like
one.
2002, 3. It was before or maybe 4 or something like that, because it was before the Revenge of the Sith came out.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, there was that show, but I don't recall any other Star Wars media shows unless it was like random ones. But
Well, I
yeah.
mean, you've got the Ewoks.
Oh, that's
Come
true.
on.
I forgot about the
Come on,
Ewoks.
Ben. We can't forget the Ewoks. I think, and this comes down to there are interviews of George Lucas himself actually saying that anything outside of the movies and the Clone Wars doesn't really count. Like, if there's a contradiction between the novels or other shows and the movies or Clone Wars, the movies and Clone Wars take precedent. They're the
I
canon
see.
thing.
Yeah.
So am I correct then that all of the novels and comics made of the Star Wars franchise are considered legends then? All of them?
Uh, every before
Everything,
2014.
yeah,
Yes.
before everything before Disney. Since the Disney takeover, everything that Disney has produced and everything that released after the Disney buyout, all of that is considered in the canon. But everything prior, yes, everything that was not the films or the Clone Wars.
I see. Yeah, and Indiana Jones is actually in a very similar boat, obviously, since it's also part of Lucasfilm and was also acquired by Disney. Neither of you have read this comic, am I correct?
Correct.
Nope.
Oh, great. So that's really exciting. So I will take us through the story and then we can get your guys' first impression on the comic and any thoughts you may have. Feel free to share or interject at any points to ask any questions. And right, that's about all. So you guys ready?
Oh yeah.
Great. So let us now begin. So the comic begins in a very strange place for the beginning of an Indiana Jones story, and that is, as it says, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. It says this as we are given the great intro panel to the comic. And in this intro panel, we see a rather large intergalactic battle that's going on. There are Star Destroyers seen in the background, as well as TIE Fighters, and there's just this mess of lasers being fired through space. And in the middle of all these lasers, as is commonly seen, is the Millennium Falcon. And inside, we see Chewie and Han Solo obviously doing their thing, piloting the ship, trying to survive. And, Han saying that they need to keep the rear deflector shields at full power, and, you know how it goes in all the films and everything. He's just giving commands to Chewie. Basically, what happens here at the start of the comic is the two of them have to jump into hyperspace blind, as they are obviously in a very tight spot, and they cannot wait for jump coordinates. So that is what they do. They jump into hyperspace completely blind, just praying that they don't smash into any planets or stars. And when they come out of hyperspace, the good news is that, of course, they're still alive. They didn't crash horrifically, but the bad news is that they have no idea where they are. And we then see the Millennium Falcon flying through space still, but we see some planets around it that look a little bit familiar. We see Saturn and what looks to be Jupiter in the background, so interesting. And Han says that they're losing power. So scanners aren't picking up any starport beacons, and most of the rocks in the solar system are dead, as he points out. But they head towards a promising looking one, a blue one. Obviously we know which planet that is, since we live on it. And they know that there's life down there, but they just have to hope that whoever they are, they have a repair bay. And they have lost their rear repulsors as well. So they are going to crash. It's not going to be a smooth landing. And crash they do. They come down over a sort of mountainous, wooded area, and the Millennium Falcon just zips right through trees, just destroying the section of the forest, and eventually it comes to rest, embedding itself in this very large tree. And Han, climbing out of the ship, remarks that this place looks just like Endor. Now, can you guys actually remind me which planet Endor is?
It's in Return of the Jedi. It is the final battle planet with the Ewoks and
right,
the
yes.
Forest Moon.
Of course, yes.
The redwoods of California.
Yeah, well, these are certainly giant redwoods that they've crashed into. These trees are absolutely gargantuan, that the ship is now destroyed. And so Chewie and Han now exit the ship and head off to obviously find the nearest settlement. And we see that as they're sort of walking through the forest, they are being watched. And Han says that he has a bad feeling about this place. And the people that are watching them are Native Americans. And they are armed with bows and arrows. And then they begin firing at the pair. And Chewie begins firing back with his crossbow, and Han is obviously firing back. They're just engaged in this all-out fight with the natives. And they sort of rush Chewie with spears and tomahawks, but he is obviously quite formidable in close combat. He is quite large. So he is bashing these guys around and flinging them around like rag dolls. And there is just spears and arrows littering every surface. The tree that they stand in on looks like a pincushion. Once Chewie had finished dealing with their attackers, he turns back to see that Han has been wounded by arrows, and quite badly. He has been mortally wounded in this fight. And there's arrows sticking out of his torso, his arm, his leg. He's in really bad shape. So he just says to him, "I'm not going to make it. Get me back to the ship." We then cut to inside the Millennium Falcon, where Han has his hand on Chewie's shoulder as he says to him that he always thought that he would be the one to die first. He tells him, "I always thought it would be you getting killed, saving me or my kids, trying to repay that damn life debt. but I'm going first into the great unknown. And he then passes away. And Chewie holds Han in his arms and lets out this loud and anguished roar. And we see that a distance away in the woods, the natives, some other natives, hear this roar in the distance. And one of them says, Sasquatch. And that is where that portion of the story leaves off. So, do you guys have any thoughts on that so far?
It's very interesting, that's for sure. It's going in a completely different route than I thought it was going to go.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting one, that's for sure. But one thing I wanted to bring up is, are you guys aware of what Han was referring to when he mentions that life debt between them?
Yes.
Could you just explain that, please?
So the life debt is where well, in the Legends material, Han saves Chewie from a Imperial slave trade, essentially. And by doing so, Chewie, the Wookiee custom is to serve that person in a life debt. They will be with them till they die or the person who has the life debt dies. Um, and that's why Chewie and Han are always together, is because Chewie is fulfilling his life debt to him for saving his life. Otherwise, he would be dead.
That's very interesting. So this comes from the Legends material, you say?
Yeah, Han was personating an Imperial officer on, I think it was Cloud City, if I'm not mistaken. Austin can correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, he goes there to do a score, find Wookiee captives. He freed Chewie, and then in doing so, Chewie responds with announcing the life debt to him.
I see. No, that's very interesting. See, I didn't know about that beforehand, so when he mentioned that life debt, I knew I wanted to bring that up to just sort of have a better understanding of what he meant by that.
Yep.
So, continuing on with the story then, we then jump to 126 years later, and we are in the same place, this great valley, this redwood forest, as we see three figures descending the slope. One of these is a guide, another a native. We see that he is leading two people through this forest, and he says, "This way, Doctor. For the past 30 years, the sightings have been concentrated on this ridge. Another footprint. We're nearing its home." So he sort of gets down, like squats, and is investigating this track that's left on the floor, these big footprints. And we see that the two figures that he's leading is none other than Indiana Jones, along with Wan Li, who's this young Chinese man. And you might know him by Short Round. He is that young kid from the Temple of Doom. Are you familiar with that character?
Oh yeah, I watched all the Indy films.
No, that's great. So, yeah, he has now teamed up with him again, evidently, on this hunt for Sasquatch, I suppose, as Indy makes a remark that the museum isn't going to pay for footprints. You know, when their guide mentions, like, oh, here's another footprint, he says, good, the museum isn't paying for footprints. You know, so obviously he has been commissioned to go and find Sasquatch, which is very fascinating because usually he's going after, you know, some artifacts or ancient civilizations, but I mean, I suppose as far as anthropology goes, the discovery of Sasquatch is quite significant, so it makes sense when you really think about it. But yeah, so they sort of traverse things, and as they're nearing the lair of Sasquatch, they're saying like, oh, there must be a cave here or something, but the guide says that this is no cave. And looking up above them, they see the wreckage of the Millennium Falcon, which is still pretty much right where it was left after the crash, though now of course there is moss and vines and stuff growing all over the top of it. It is quite dilapidated. And so Indy helps Short Round, I mean, I'll just be referring to him as Short Round. That's how everybody knows him in any case. So he helps him up that ramp on the underside of the ship, and the two of them then traverse the interior of the Falcon. Short Round asks what this place is, and Indy replies by saying that he doesn't know, and he's never seen anything like it, not even in Atlantis. Now that's a cool callback as well, because another Dark Horse published comic tells the story of Indiana Jones discovering the lost city of Atlantis, which is quite a long and exciting story. It's also a game, by the way, just to mention that as well. It's a very old, rather enjoyable game, the story of him finding Atlantis. But something else interesting that Indy says is that this all feels very familiar to him. They then find Han's remains, still propped up in the chair, with the arrows still sticking out of him. He, of course, is a skeleton at this point. And Indy, sort of investigating the scene, just says, he looks human. Poor bastard. And Short Round asks him, well, what now? Will we continue looking for this monster? And Indy says no. And the final panel of this comic shows the Millennium Falcon from the outside, and far off from it, overlooking it on a branch, sits Chewbacca, up high in a tree, obviously unseen by everybody there, as he just watches over the ship. And the final panel has text that reads, "Let's leave him as part of the great unknown." So that is how this comic ends. Again, it's a very short one. There's not exactly some huge climax. It was more just an interesting sort of what-if scenario, I suppose. But it is quite sad to think that for 126 years, Chewbacca has kind of just been hanging about the site of the wreckage, just sort of watching over the ship, watching over Han, and just he's basically just become Sasquatch now, I suppose. So it's interesting what you mentioned earlier about the life debt, because you said it ends if either the person themselves dies or if the person that their life debt is for dies. But I mean, I suppose Chewie can't exactly leave in any case, even though Han's now dead. It's quite sad.
Yeah, that's a very sad ending. It's interesting to know that Indy had that it was kind of like a I don't know, feeling of it being familiar, even though we all know they're two different characters, but watching the films, they're the same actor, so I
Yes,
like
of
that
course.
little that nod.
Yeah, it's perfect though. It's just that one little sort of tip of the hat to it, no pun intended. And there will always be that connection between Han and Indy, even though the characters, like you say, are completely different. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on how they've linked these two franchises together? Because I thought the Sasquatch angle was very unique. It was definitely a very odd way to take the story, but I appreciated it very much. I actually thought it was quite a cool addition.
I really do think it's an interesting little crossover, especially like for a comic. And when you expect this out of a comic, is really where we get a lot with this. And so like when a comic crossovers are supposed to be like this fun, maybe sometimes tragic, maybe sometimes, but not really overly serious. These comic crossovers are meant to be. And so I really appreciated that they didn't take it that seriously.
Yeah, it was just a fun thought experiment. Like I mentioned earlier, a fun what if. Like you say, it's not canon, and therefore it can be fun. It can literally just be these nuts hypotheticals that can actually come to life then through these.
Yeah.
No, it's very, very, very cool. So something interesting to note is that the natives referring to Chewie as Sasquatch, when I first read this, I thought, oh my god, like he's literally Sasquatch. He's the creature, he's responsible for the legend of the Sasquatch. But then I thought, wait, hold on a second. If this is only 120 something years before Indiana Jones take place, then that's nowhere near early enough to actually be responsible for the legend of the creature itself. So it seems that there could possibly be the real Sasquatch out there, but obviously Chewie has been mistakenly identified as him. So that's an interesting little turn of events there. Because, I mean, I always did think that Chewie looks very much like Sasquatch. I mean, all he has to do is take off that sort of bandolier, that shoulder thing that he has on all the time, the silver belt, and he would look right at home. Speaking of that belt, he hasn't taken it off, mind you. In the last panel of the comic, we see him crouched up in the tree, and he is still wearing it. So he has not taken that off. Would you think then that Chewie would leave then, if he could?
I would think so, because I mean, knowing Chewbacca, he would do whatever to honor Han. And that would honestly, I would believe he would go back into their own galaxy and deliver him to his family or whatever's left of his family
Yeah, you
at this
certainly wouldn't
point.
want to leave him behind just rotting in a ship on some weird planet they've never been to.
Exactly.
Yeah, that is very sad. And Chewie himself has a family, does he not?
Yes,
It
and it
depends on which.
depends where you're looking at. Yes and no, it depends.
I see. Well,
Because
yeah,
technically he does through the Christmas special, but they also don't, no one likes the Christmas special.
I have seen that Christmas special. I know that I do know what you're talking about, and yes, that certainly did split the fan base. It was also a very interesting little bit of media there. They clearly were just having fun with that as well. I mean, I know that Chewie, you know, he obviously has been on the Falcon a whole bunch, but it's also unfortunate then that the Falcon is obviously damaged beyond repair. You know, and there is obviously no equipment on Earth, especially not in the time this takes place, to fix the ship with. There'd be nothing to use on the planet at all. So, I mean, one can hope, I suppose, that one day Chewie is actually able to leave the planet. I mean, hopefully, it's nice that Indy decides to leave him as part of the great unknown, as he says. Because, I mean, the thought of Chewie being captured by the government is not a very nice thought, I suppose.
Right.
No. Oh God, no,
I
not
th
our government either.
I think that Chewie, to go back to the question, like, would he try to leave? I think that he would try to leave if he could. Mainly because, especially given the time frame that this takes place, he would feel a responsibility, I believe at least, that he would feel a responsibility to like go and make sure that everyone else was okay.
Hmm.
Like Luke and Leia and all of them. Just because Han would have cared about them,
Of course.
Chewie would have felt a need to follow up.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And I mean, and Chewbacca also has a strong tie to the Skywalker family line and as a whole.
Well, I definitely don't think that Han is the only reason he's there. You know, I know the life debt is working throughout all the stories, but I mean, of course he does have a bond with everybody else. It's not like, you know, if Han wasn't there, he'd just be out the door immediately. Yeah, very sad, but it is nice though that it didn't end with him in a cage. You know, for once, Indy does not get his hands on what he sets out to find, and that's a good thing in this case, I'm sure. But yeah, so that is Into the Great Unknown. So very fun, very cool. So the comic was said to take place 7 or 8 years after the Temple of Doom, which occurs in 1935, which places this story in either 1942 or 43. And Short Round in the Temple of Doom was around 11 or 12. It's kind of difficult to say as the sources kind of contradict themselves. And I know that between legends and canons and novels and comics, like you guys were saying earlier about Star Wars, contradictions may happen. But the problem is that with this detail, with Short Round's age, it contradicts itself in the very same book. So it's pretty hard to tell how old he is, but 11 or 12 will suffice. So that makes him around 19 or 20 years old in this story. And I actually loved seeing him show up again. it's not the only time he returns in the stories, not even in the comics. You know, he does show up a handful of times after the Temple of Doom. But it is something I love to see, because watching that film, it's one of my favorite things about the Temple of Doom is the relationship between Indy and Short Round. And once you finish watching the Temple of Doom, you know, you can't help but think, do they still talk? You know, I mean, I know Indy is globe-trotting constantly. He's all over the world, but surely Short Round would want to, you know, team up with him, maybe work with him, because, I mean, he's clearly capable. I mean, he handles himself amazingly, and that's at the age of 12. So, I mean, you know, you can only assume that he just grows more, you know, sort of streetwise and capable as he gets older. So I loved that detail. Very cool inclusion. Even though he didn't play a huge role in the story, it's still, of all the sidekicks he could have had for the story, I'm glad it was him. What were your guys' thoughts on Short Round in the film?
Oh, I mean, I love Short Round and Temple of Doom. He's probably one of the best characters next to Indy. And I mean, even like looking at today's standards with the actor getting I think he got a Oscar. I know he got an award. I can't remember
Yeah,
which one.
it's also
Um,
slipped my mind. I'm not sure which award, but I did see that he was awarded something.
yeah, and just seeing that is just fills me with joy, and also reuniting with Harrison Ford as well
Yeah, that
and
was
seeing
great.
them together, it was just great. So like, yeah, I love Short Round. He's a great character, and even to in today's like, even just in the meta of everything with the actors, it's just great seeing them getting along still to this day.
Yeah, I know it's always, it is really heartwarming to see that. Also, something I wanted to bring up is just a fun little bit of trivia which concerns which concerns Chewbacca in relation to Bigfoot. I'm unsure if you guys have heard of this before. But when it comes to Chewie being mistaken as Bigfoot, there was a real concern for that in real life. I don't know if you heard about the precautions that had to be taken during the filming of The Return of the Jedi, but the actor who plays Chewbacca, Peter Mayhew, is 7'3", so the guy is absolutely massive. Very tall. But when they were filming The Return of the Jedi, they were filming some of the scenes in the Redwood National Park in California. And Peter Mayhew was given strict instructions not to wander too far away when in costume, out of fear of being shot by hunters. Because, I mean, when he would be walking around in the woods, he would have to have several crew members with him at all times wearing bright vests, you know, to ensure that he doesn't just get mistaken as Bigfoot and shot at by, you know, can you imagine? That would be horrendous.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't surprise me. That was a precaution. Knowing where we live, where me and Austin live in the world, that doesn't surprise us one bit.
Do any of you guys live in or near Bigfoot country?
Thank God, no.
I have been to Bigfoot country, but I do not live there.
I see. Well, you know, something that I thought though, and you can just tell me your thoughts on this as well, is having the crew members surrounding him with bright vests might not help the case anyway, because I think there would still be a chance of a hunter seeing this and thinking, oh, the government is colluding with Bigfoot, I knew it. Just shoot them anyway.
That, or they would go up and say, "Hey, how much do you want for the Bigfoot?"
Or they try to buy him.
Right. I can totally see that too.
Oh man, what a turn of events. That would be one heck of a scandal, I think. But yeah, learning about that was quite funny. The fact that that was an actual concern when filming the movie. That's great. So, finishing up the discussions about the story, I wanted to sort of just bring up some other little crossovers and go over some Easter eggs that are seen in the Indiana Jones film, the films that are in reference to Star Wars. Are you guys familiar with some of these?
Possibly.
Well, you can just let me know as we go through them. So, kind of the first one that you see, the first reference to Star Wars is in Raiders, when Indy is escaping from the temple after the iconic boulder chase, and you know how the whole thing goes. And Jock, that friend of his who was waiting with the plane, there's lettering on the side of the plane that reads OB-CPO. That's kind of the call sign of the plane, which is obviously Obi-Wan and C-3PO, which is a pretty cool little nod there. And also one of the other most well-known Easter eggs is that in the Well of Souls, when they actually find the Ark of the Covenant, on one of the pillars surrounding the Ark, there is a hieroglyph depicting C-3PO and R2-D2 standing beside each other. You can kind of see it right beside Indy in the one shot, so that's a pretty cool one. Also, in Temple of Doom, going back to that film, that whole mess that happens at that club at the start, where we are introduced to Short Round and everything, that club is called Club Obi-Wan, which is quite cool.
Yeah, I knew that one.
I did not know that one.
Yeah, that's very cool. You can see the sign. It's like this blue glowing sign. As they jump out the window, you can see it, Club Obi-Wan. But another little layer to this Easter egg that I found absolutely amazing is that there is a reverse Easter egg of this. Seen in the show Star Wars The Bad Batch. Are you guys familiar with that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, roughly.
So in this show, in the one episode, I believe it is in season 2, there is a whole sort of mess similar to Temple of Doom that happens at a club. It's this cantina, a very shady place, and this club in the Star Wars show is called Club Lao Che, and Lao Che is the sort of crime boss that was in Club Obi-Wan in Temple of Doom, the one that they escape at the start of the film. So you have the Star Wars cantina named after a crime boss from Indiana Jones who was in a club, or rather owned a club that was named after a character from Star Wars. So it's just this really fun, layers and layers and layers of Easter eggs. So I'd always known about the Club Obi-Wan thing, but I had no clue about the Club Lao Che one. That was a very cool addition to that. And there's some other small things that kind of happen throughout Star Wars media as well. The Ark of the Covenant appears several times throughout Star Wars media, and I believe it is in the Clone Wars that Indiana Jones's hat is seen. And in another one of the series, I believe it's one of the newer ones, you can see Indiana Jones's whip, and there's also a bunch of other nice things like the Sankara stones from Temple of Doom. These are all these fun little trinkets that are scattered around the background shots of a lot of Star Wars scenes from all over the place, from shows, from everything. So that's all really cool. A lot of references between the two franchises actually take place in the Lego games. Have you guys played Lego Indy or Lego Star Wars at all?
I play in all the Lego Star Wars games. I have not played the Lego Indie games yet.
I see. Now the Lego Star Wars they're really, really great games. Love that. So in Lego Indiana Jones, there are several references to Star Wars, as you can imagine, because again, it's Lego, it's fun, they can kind of just do what they want. So that idol, if you recall, that golden idol from the start of Raiders, the very first artifact we see Indy recover, he escapes the temple with it in the Lego game and is obviously ambushed by Belloc and the tribesmen, who then take it from him. But in the Lego game, since you've not played it, you can go look these scenes up. They're all really great. You'll be able to find them on YouTube, of course. But upon being ambushed by Belloc in the Lego game, Indy, sort of acts all resigned and, oh, fine, you can have it. And he takes out C-3PO's head, trying to, trick him almost. Of course, there's no talking, there's no voice lines in the Lego games, but Belloc makes it known that he knows who that is, so he's not going to be fooled by that, and then forces Indy to give over the real idol. So it's just a bunch of wacky stuff like that. It's really great. And there's also a playable character from Star Wars. You can find these hidden characters around the different levels. You can find Luke, Leia, R2-D2, C-3PO, and Chewie. And once you find all of these characters, you then unlock Han Solo as a playable character. Indiana Jones is also a playable character in LEGO Star Wars. You can unlock him as well, run around with the whip and the gun, so that's really cool. And there's actually we'll be here all day if we try and cover each and every little nod or Easter egg that gets said or seen. But just in the Lego game, some of the other ones that happen is in Mars's castle in the when Rey is getting Luke's lightsaber. You can see the Ark of the Covenant in the background. And also there's a scene when Han and Chewie are running away. They're trying to escape something, and they roll under a closing door, and Han loses his hair. His Lego hair pops off, and he like grabs it right as the door's closing. So, of course, that's an obvious Indy reference. That gets referenced in everything nowadays. So that was really cool. And again, it's because it's a Harrison Ford character, so that's fun. So yeah, that is all we are going to be covering for this episode. Any last thoughts before we close out?
I just think the comic is something really cool to have as a connection between both the Indiana Jones franchise and Star Wars, being both born from George Lucas. I think it's just a really nice touch to connect the two.
Have you seen that theory, actually, that the two franchises exist in the same sort of world, and that the whole Indiana Jones story is Han Solo dreaming while he's encased in the carbonite? Have you seen that before?
I have seen that. I have seen that theory. That would be a very interesting theory for sure. And that would also kind of explain some of the Easter eggs that are in Indiana Jones that are Star Wars related,
Mm,
because all the Easter eggs are referenced to obviously the original trilogy, because that's when those films were done when Indiana Jones was being filmed.
yes, yes.
So yeah, I mean, I have seen that theory, and I mean, it'd be pretty cool to know that if that was the case.
It would be very interesting, but I have to say, personally, I don't think that is the case. It is, again, very fun kind of thought experiment, but I just, I doubt that he would be able to have such specific and accurate dreams when it comes to Earth's history. Yeah, it's.
Right, yeah. Yeah, he had no idea. He doesn't know what a car is or anything like that, or
But then again, I suppose the whole thought is that cars as a whole were birthed in his mind, in his dream. So the insinuation is that it's not just Indy then, but perhaps that we are all living inside Han Solo's head. So that's something to think about. That's some tinfoil hat territory.
that's just Inception.
It is, yeah, or like the Matrix or something, but it's just Harrison Ford's mind instead.
Dear God.
Oh, man. But yeah, no, very fun little theory, but no, I do doubt that that is the case. But yes, yeah, being kind of sister franchises, of course, there's forever going to be links between them, and constant referencing. Even if it's not visually, I have seen several occasions in Star Wars media, be it the books or some of the series, where a character will say something in a way, like they'll say it, basically one of the catchphrases from the films. That's how it goes in a lot of films. I was watching Chicken Run, of all things. Chicken Run, the Oddman animation film. And there was an Indiana Jones reference in there, so that just goes to show how far-reaching these franchises are in terms of, how memorable they are and how they stick with people.
Well, man, it goes down to the line that Harrison Ford says, "I have a bad feeling about this." Like that is used everywhere
That is
since
true.
the original trilogy.
That
Like
is
I think
true.
doesn't and I'm if I recall, I think Indy even says it at one point
I'm
in the
unsure of that,
one of the
actually.
films, may or someone in the film. I know someone in the Indy films have said that.
Hmm. But that line actually it's actually so common that I didn't even know that it came from Star Wars originally. I honestly didn't know that at all. I just thought it was something that everybody says because everybody says it, but then when I learned that it literally came from Han Solo, I was like, oh my word. Like that is so that is so many movies and everything that decided to give a nod towards Star Wars. It's crazy. When it comes to the Indiana Jones media, I guess I just will ask before we close out what your thoughts are on the Indiana Jones films, your favorite indie film, if you can pick one out, and sort of your history with it, when you were introduced to it, that sort of thing.
Well, for me, I was introduced to it pretty young. I grew up on Star Wars, on the Lucas Arts stuff. So, my dad was very huge in this. He loved Star Wars. He grew up with Star Wars. He grew up with Indiana Jones. So he had me grow up with those as well. Watched the originals, watched the prequels, watched all of Indiana Jones. And I would say probably my favorite would probably be uh Temple of Doom, the second Indiana Jones out of all of them. I really like that one, and I always love the scene where it was that bandit in the desert is doing all those fancy moves, and Andy just pulls out his pistol and just shoots him.
Oh, in Raiders.
Oh,
Do
and that's
you
Raiders, yeah.
do you know
I
actually
love that
why that
scene.
came to be?
Wasn't I think Harrison wasn't feeling good that day, I'm pretty
Yes,
sure,
he
right?
he had
And
food
he was just
poisoning.
like
Yeah.
he's like, screw it. I'm just gonna go.
You can actually see the actual fight that was supposed to happen. He was supposed to have this whole drawn out fight sequence with the swordsman, and you can actually see this in the outtakes. You can see him flinging his whip at the guy, cracking it, and you can also see this random guy just walk right in front of the camera, as everyone behind the camera is going what the heck, dude? It's just this random guy off the street. He just walks right in front of the camera. So there were just so many reasons why that wasn't used, obviously. But yeah, no, I mean, I love looking back at how things like that come to be. That just the fact that he was, afraid to be too far from a toilet that day, and that resulted in one of the most iconic scenes out of the whole Indiana Jones franchise.
I didn't. I watched Star Wars as a child when my dad sat me down to watch the original trilogy, and I had me hooked. I never really got into Indiana Jones even a little bit until I was like a later teenager. When I told my mom I had never seen them, and she was like, "Well, we're gonna watch them." Well, we watched Raiders and Temple of Doom, and then for some reason I have yet to see Last Crusade or any of the new films.
You're gonna love Last Crusade when you get around to watching it. I'm excited for you for that one.
Yeah, eventually, one day.
But that is all we are going to be covering for this episode. So thank you guys so much for coming onto the show. It was really great to have you. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
No, no problem at all. And before we close out, is there anything you guys want to shout out? Any projects you're working on? Any of the other shows you want to bring attention to?
Oh God.
How
I have
much
too
time you got?
many. Yeah, really. I do way too much. So, as you know, Austin and I are the hosts of Holocron Histories, Star Wars Canon versus Legends, where we dive into the Star Wars universe of both Legends and Canon and comparing the two. Right now we're doing a lot more Legends content, specifically with the SWTOR stuff. I'm also a host of the Final Fantasy Lorecast, the Wizarding World Lorecast, the Witcher Lorecast, and the Mobile Suit Gundam Lorecast, or just Gundam Lorecast. All of those are on Robots Radio. So yeah, I do a lot. I do way too much.
I host two other shows, the Holocron, or not, well, yes, the Holocron Histories podcast, but the Assassin's Creed Lorecast, and the Dragon Age Lorecast. I host both those shows there, and you can find me on Discord. We used to say that the only podcast you can find Ben and I together on is the Holocron Histories podcast, but that's no longer true because we have guests together on several shows now.
Oh, awesome. So, to anyone listening, you can go check out the Holocron Histories podcast if you haven't already, along with all the other shows they've just mentioned. You will not regret it. And thank you all so much for listening. And if you have any questions, you can find me in my office. But until then, remember, leave a toolbox or two in your local woods. You might just help Sasquatch get home. I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Indiana Jones Lorecast. If you like what you hear and want to support the show, then drop a rating or review wherever you're listening. I'll see you next time.